Jane Fonda, a cinematic icon with an illustrious career, holds a surprising secret. She has never watched her own 1977 film. It's not due to the film's quality or her performance, but because of a complex story hidden behind it. What could have led the acclaimed actress to resolutely avoid one of her own significant works? This story will reveal the connection between cinema, truth, and the choices that can shape a legendary career. Jane Fonda and Julia, more than just a role. In 1977, Jane Fonda was not only a talented actress, but also a cultural icon known for her strong political activism, particularly her stance against the Vietnam War, which led to significant criticism and an unofficial Hollywood blacklist. After years of turmoil, Fonda was seeking to rehabilitate her image with the public through more mainstream film projects. Julia was one such golden opportunity. In the film, Fonda portrayed Lillian Hellman, a renowned American playwright and close friend of the character Julia. This role allowed Fonda to continue expressing her strong political spirit, a story of fighting fascism, courage and selflessness, while still appealing to a mass audience. Fonda's performance in Julia received widespread praise. Critics lauded how she depicted a steadfast, struggling woman, whose intense energy and tough demeanor were considered characteristic of her personality. This role helped Fonda solidify her position, showing that she could be both a box office star and an artist with depth and social commitment. Alongside Fonda, Vanessa Redgrave also made a powerful impression as Julia, the mysterious and brave friend. Redgrave, like Fonda, was also known for her left-wing political views and social activism, such as opposing documentaries about Palestine. The collaboration of two actresses with similar ideologies created a special appeal for the film. Set in post-Nixon America, the mid-1970s was haunted by political conspiracies, and figures who were once sanctioned were gradually being rehabilitated. Julia emerged at just the right time, becoming part of that wave, not just as an entertaining film, but also carrying a powerful political message. Peak glory and the fateful introduction at the 1977 Oscars. The success of Julia culminated at the 50th Academy Awards in 1978 for films released in 1977. The film received numerous prestigious nominations, and on the awards night, a memorable moment unfolded. Lillian Hellman, the author of the memoir Pentimento on which the film was based, was invited and received a standing ovation. The person who introduced her was none other than Jane Fonda. Fonda, elegant in appearance and speaking with a respectful tone, introduced Hellman as a symbol of courage, a woman who dared to stand up against fascism and defend her conscience. This was a profoundly meaningful moment, not only for Hellman but also for Fonda, a confirmation of the values both women believed in and pursued. Fonda, through this action, publicly expressed her admiration and support for Hellman, a figure who had been marked by the government and public opinion for her political stances. However, that moment of glory quickly drew mixed reactions. William F. Buckley, Jr., a prominent conservative commentator, didn't hesitate to sharply criticize Fonda. He called Fonda's introduction of Hellman idiotic and even sarcastically suggested that Fonda should receive an Oscar for the stupidest woman in public life. This criticism was an early sign of the rifts to come, but at the time, the focus remained on the film's success and the shining presence of both Hellman and Fonda. The shadow of truth, the Julia controversy and accusations. After the Oscar glow, the film Julia inadvertently ignited a fierce debate about the authenticity of Lillian Hellman's story. This was no minor detail. It called into question Hellman's entire career and character. It all began when Hellman's memoir, Pentimento, was published. A psychoanalyst named Dr. Muriel Gardner started receiving calls from friends, all of whom recognized the Julia story in the book. Muriel Gardner's life astonishingly mirrored Hellman's character, Julia. She also came from a wealthy family, studied at Oxford, went to Vienna to study psychoanalysis with Sigmund Freud, had a daughter, and most importantly, was involved in the Austrian resistance movement against fascism, risking her life to help Jews and political activists escape. The most shocking detail was that the Julia in Hellman's memoir was described as having lost a leg in a student uprising, a detail that also saw Gardner severely injured in her own resistance efforts, though not losing a leg. Initially, Gardner thought it was just a coincidence, but the overwhelming similarities compelled her to act. She wrote to Hellman to clarify. However, Hellman's response was rather unexpected and evasive. She denied receiving a letter from Julia and maintained that Gardner was not the inspiration for her character, stating, "I generally don't read mail, it bores me." Hellman even insinuated that the woman might be someone else. However, deeper investigation revealed crucial clues. Wolf Schwabacher, Hellman's lawyer and close friend, was also a close friend of Muriel Gardner. He had a great interest in Gardner's resistance work. This suggested a potential channel through which Hellman could have accessed information about Gardner's life. Furthermore, Dr. Herbert Steiner from the Austrian Resistance Archives also confirmed that he knew of no other American woman deeply involved in the Austrian resistance apart from only Mary, Muriel Gardner's code name. To clear her name and document her contributions, Muriel Gardner published her own memoir, code name Mary, in 1981, detailing her resistance work. This further fueled questions among journalists and critics. Could Muriel indeed be Julia? Did Julia truly not die as Hellman had recounted? Critics and journalists began scrutinizing Hellman's story in Pentimento. Pauline Kael, an influential film critic who had initially praised the film, later wrote that the similarities between Gardner's life and the Julia story were startling. Vincent Canby of the New York Times also remarked that the Julia story was a vague piece of narrative that cries out for further clarification. Kael even sarcastically noted that the Marxist Freudian queen, portrayed by Redgrave in the film, would probably be a joke to anyone but Redgrave, hinting at the implausibility of an overly perfect heroic character. Public accusation and the shocking lawsuit. The peak of the controversy occurred in 1979 when renowned writer Mary McCarthy appeared on The Dick Cavett Show. McCarthy, who had a history of intense confrontation with Hellman, publicly declared, "I think she is an overrated, bad writer and dishonest. You can be sure that every word she writes is a lie, including and the." This blunt accusation sent shockwaves through the public and put Lillian Hellman on the defensive. In 1980, Hellman sued McCarthy for libel, seeking $1.75 million in damages. Hellman refused to comment publicly on the lawsuit, only telling a newspaper that she doesn't object to Miss McCarthy calling me a liar, but she must say where and how I lied. The lawsuit triggered a series of in-depth investigations by journalists. Samuel McCracken, in his article Julia and Other Fictions by Lillian Hellman, conducted a detailed analysis and concluded that almost every detail is improbable to the point of discrediting a third-rate thriller or demonstrably contradicted by the historical record. McCracken used specific evidence such as train schedules, locations, and historical events, like air raids, to prove that Hellman's story could not be literally true. For example, Hellman's description of a dramatic journey through Berlin under bombs and strict Nazi control seemed inconsistent with historical records of the specific times and places she mentioned. Martha Gellhorn, a renowned war correspondent and ex-wife of Ernest Hemingway, also wrote a scathing article in the Paris Review titled Guerre de Plume, War of the Pen. Gellhorn exposed numerous errors and contradictions in Hellman's memoirs, questioning the plausibility of the Julia story and asserting that this particular chapter was highly suspicious. Gellhorn, with her extensive experience in documenting truth, argued that the details recounted by Hellman were too perfect and cinematic to be believable. With overwhelming evidence from Muriel Gardner, historians, and investigative journalists, it seems almost certain that the Julia story, as told by Lillian Hellman, did not literally happen to her. The issue wasn't about minor errors or imperfect memory. The core problem was that Hellman placed herself in a central role, using the non-fiction genre to portray herself as a courageous anti-fascist heroine, even though those actions likely never truly happened to her. Hellman's consistent inconsistencies in her accounts and her refusal to clarify when questioned are significant indicators. Hellman's legacy became complex. Her works often contained themes of deceit and misrepresentation, frequently leading to negative consequences, most notably in her play The Children's Hour. It appears Hellman held a romantic moral point of view that might have crossed into the boundary of propaganda, prioritizing moral messages over factual accuracy. The Julia story seems to be a portrait of the woman Hellman wished she had been, the person who would overcome fear to act bravely. It also subtly criticized those who didn't risk life and limb and hinted at figures who didn't stand up during the McCarthy era. Journalist Samuel McCracken concluded that Hellman manipulated millions of readers and film audiences into admiring her as a moral exemplar and as a ruthlessly honest writer, despite her clear dishonesty. Ironically, Hellman's inability to distance herself from pro-Soviet politics and her subsequent legal action against Mary McCarthy became her downfall. From a lauded playwright/memoirist, she became a controversial figure whose honesty was widely questioned. Lillian Hellman passed away in 1984, and the lawsuit with Mary McCarthy concluded without a final verdict, leaving the truth of the Julia story definitively unresolved in court. However, the overwhelming evidence from multiple sources led most of the public and critics to believe that the story was not an accurate account of Hellman's personal experience. Why did Jane Fonda refuse to watch this film? Now, let's delve into Jane Fonda's perspective. After the lawsuit and the public revelations about Hellman's dishonesty, Fonda's connection to the film Julia became more complicated than ever. Imagine how Jane Fonda must have felt learning that the story she wholeheartedly brought to life, the character she bravely introduced and praised at the Oscars, might have been a product of exaggeration or even fiction. One of the primary reasons could be a feeling of deception or dishonesty. Jane Fonda has always been known for her unwavering principles and her desire to stand for what she believes is right. The discovery that the original story, presented by Hellman as a memoir, lacked authenticity could have left Fonda feeling deeply betrayed. An artist like Fonda, who frequently uses her platform to convey messages and advocate for social causes, might have found it unsettling to inadvertently become part of disseminating a story that wasn't entirely truthful. Furthermore, this could have impacted her personal image. Although Jane Fonda had worked hard to rehabilitate her image after previous controversies, being linked to a scandal concerning the original author's veracity might have made her uncomfortable. While not Fonda's fault, the association of the film Julia with accusations of Hellman's dishonesty could be a blemish Fonda didn't want to revisit. Additionally, this created deep internal conflict. Fonda publicly admired and introduced Hellman at one of Hollywood's most prestigious nights. Subsequently, facing the reality that Hellman might have been dishonest about those core events could have created a major conflict within Fonda. She might have felt confused or disappointed about having placed her trust in a story that wasn't entirely true. Watching the film again would likely resurrect these emotions, along with the criticisms from William F. Buckley Jr. and public skepticism. Finally, it relates to respect for the truth. As someone who always fought for justice and truth, the questioning of Julia's authenticity might have gone against Fonda's personal principles. Once the truth was known, revisiting a work whose core was dubious could become an uncomfortable experience, stripping it of its original meaning. Although Jane Fonda has never publicly stated that she refused to watch the film Julia for these specific reasons, the historical evidence and the complexity of the controversy surrounding Lillian Hellman paint a plausible picture. Julia was more than just an Oscar-winning film. It was a symbol of admiration, courage, and later, a lesson in truth and responsibility. For Jane Fonda, perhaps, not rewatching that 1977 episode was her way of protecting the values she always upheld and leaving behind a story whose truth remains a big question mark. Ultimately, while Julia remains a memorable cinematic work, the story of its authenticity has left a deep imprint. For Jane Fonda, perhaps not rewatching the film is a way for her to protect the core values of truth and integrity she always championed. What about you? What do you think about an actor refusing to revisit their own work due to behind-the-scenes controversy?